The avoidant doesn't bond the way most people expect. All the traditional relationship advice about creating connection doesn't work with them. Being consistently available makes them take you for granted. Showing vulnerability makes them uncomfortable. Expressing your feelings makes them withdraw. Trying to get close makes them create distance. Everything that would create bonding with a secure person activates defenses in the avoidant. So what actually makes them bond to you? The answer is counterintuitive and uncomfortable. The avoidant bonds to people who demonstrate they don't need the avoidant, who have full lives independent of the relationship, who are comfortable with distance, who don't pressure for more intimacy than the avoidant can handle. The avoidant bonds to people who mirror their own avoidance, who make intimacy feel optional rather than required, who create safety through not demanding too much. This doesn't mean you should become avoidant yourself or play games or withhold deliberately. But it does mean that the qualities that create bonding with an avoidant are fundamentally different from the qualities that create bonding with secure people. And understanding this difference is crucial if you're trying to build connection with someone whose entire psychology is organized around avoiding connection. The paradox of bonding with an avoidant is that they bond through disconnection. They need space to miss you. They need your independence to feel safe. They need your ability to be fine without them, to not feel suffocated by your need for them. The avoidant bonds when they're given room to choose you rather than feeling obligated to you. They bond when their presence in your life feels optional rather than essential. They bond when they can leave and return without drama or punishment. All of this feels backwards if you're anxiously attached or even securely attached, because it contradicts how bonding typically works. But the avoidance nervous system is wired to interpret pursuit as danger and space as safety, and bonding can only occur when they feel safe. So creating the conditions for avoidant bonding means creating the exact opposite conditions you'd create for any other attachment style. Understanding what makes avoidants bond to you doesn't mean you should contort yourself to earn their attachment. The conditions that create avoidant bonding often require you to suppress your needs, to accept less intimacy than you want, to live with ambiguity that's uncomfortable, to tolerate distance that feels like rejection. Most people can't sustain these conditions without damaging themselves. And even when you create perfect conditions for avoidant bonding, bonding doesn't guarantee healthy relationship. The avoidant can bond to you and still be incapable of the consistency, vulnerability, and commitment that partnership requires. Bonding is necessary, but not sufficient. It's the starting point, not the destination. And many people discover that even when they've successfully created avoidant bonding, the relationship that results isn't what they actually wanted or needed. They bond to your emotional independence. The single most powerful bonding mechanism for avoidance is encountering someone who is genuinely emotionally independent. Not someone performing independence while secretly needing the avoidant, but someone whose emotional state genuinely doesn't depend on the avoidant's presence or behavior. Someone who has their own sources of fulfillment, their own emotional regulation strategies, their own life that feels complete whether the avoidant is in it or not. This level of genuine emotional independence is magnetic to avoidance because it eliminates the primary threat they're always defending against, being needed. When you don't need them for your emotional well-being, when your happiness doesn't require their presence, when your stability doesn't depend on their behavior, the avoidant can finally relax. The avoidant bonds to emotional independence because it removes the pressure that typically makes them run. When you need them, they feel responsible for your emotional state, and that responsibility feels like suffocating burden. They're terrified they can't meet your needs, terrified they'll fail and you'll be hurt, terrified that your need for them will consume their autonomy. But when you don't need them, when you're clearly fine on your own, they don't carry that burden. Your emotional independence gives them permission to be imperfect, to be inconsistent, to be themselves without fear that their limitations will destroy you. And in that relief from pressure, bonding becomes possible because they're not constantly in fight or flight mode, defending against your needs. Emotional independence also bonds the avoidant because it mirrors their highest value. The avoidant prizes independence above almost everything. They've organized their life around being self-sufficient, not needing anyone, being able to handle everything alone. When they encounter someone who shares that value, who demonstrates equivalent independence, they experience recognition, You're like them. You understand what they understand about the importance of maintaining yourself. You're not trying to merge or create dependency or build a relationship structure that requires constant connection. You're demonstrating you can be in relationship while remaining whole and separate, and that demonstration is deeply attractive to someone whose greatest fear is losing themselves in connection. The avoidant bonds to your emotional independence specifically because it proves you won't fall apart if they need space. One of the avoidant's core fears is that if they withdraw, the other person will be devastated, will fall apart, will make the withdrawal into a catastrophe. This fear makes them want to withdraw preemptively to avoid ever being responsible for someone else's emotional collapse. But when you demonstrate genuine emotional independence, when you show that you're fine when they need distance, when you don't make their space-taking into abandonment, the avoidant experiences relief. They can breathe. They can take space without guilt. They can be themselves without destroying you. And in that safety, genuine attachment becomes possible. They bond to your mysterious unavailability. The avoidant bonds to people who maintain some level of mystery, who aren't completely available, who have parts of their life that don't include the avoidant. This isn't about playing games or being manipulative. It's about genuinely having a full life where the avoidant is one part, not the whole thing. You have friendships that are important to you. You have hobbies and interests that absorb your attention. You have goals and projects that require your energy. You have parts of yourself that you keep private. This mystery and unavailability creates intrigue for the avoidant because it means there's always more to discover. The relationship never feels completely known or controlled, and they're pursuing understanding rather than being pursued. The mysterious unavailability bonds the avoidant because it activates their chase mechanism. Avoidants are often attracted to what's slightly unavailable or uncertain. When you're completely available, completely known, completely predictable, the avoidant loses interest because there's no challenge, no discovery, no pursuit required. But when you maintain mystery, when you're sometimes unavailable because you have other priorities, when you have depth they haven't fully plumbed, the avoidant becomes curious. They want to understand you. They want more access to you. They want to solve the puzzle you represent. And in wanting these things, they're bonding to you through pursuit rather than through being pursued. The avoidant also bonds to unavailability because it means you can't engulf them. Engulfment is one of the avoidant's primary fears. They're terrified of being consumed by relationship, of losing themselves in someone else's needs and presence. But when you're unavailable sometimes, when you have clear boundaries around your own time and space, when you have a life they're not the center of, engulfment becomes impossible. Your unavailability proves you're not trying to merge with them, not trying to make them your everything, not trying to create the kind of enmeshed relationship they find suffocating. Your separateness creates safety, and in safety comes the possibility of closeness on terms the avoidant can tolerate. The mystery bonds them because it means you have inner life they don't control or fully understand. The avoidant fears being known, but they're fascinated by knowing. When you maintain some privacy, when you have thoughts and feelings and experiences you don't immediately share, when you keep parts of yourself to yourself, the avoidant experiences you as complex and interesting. They're drawn to your depth. They want to understand you. They're bonding to the challenge of knowing someone who isn't an open book. This dynamic keeps them engaged in ways that complete transparency never could, because transparency eliminates the discovery process that the avoidant finds compelling. They bond to consistency without pressure. The avoidant bonds powerfully to people who are consistently present without being demanding. This is a delicate balance that's difficult to maintain. You're reliably there when you say you'll be there. You follow through on commitments. You're trustworthy and steady. But simultaneously, you're not pressuring them for more than they can give. You're not demanding they reciprocate your consistency. You're not making your reliability into obligation they have to match. You're being steady because that's who you are, not because you're trying to create guilt or expectation in them. This combination of reliability without pressure creates the safest possible environment for avoidant bonding. The consistency matters because the avoidant's core wound is usually around inconsistency or abandonment from early caregivers. Despite their defenses, somewhere deep in their psychology, they're longing for someone who won't leave, who will stay steady, who can be counted on. When you demonstrate this consistency, when you're there again and again without being dramatic about it, without making it into a big deal, you're meeting a need the avoidant doesn't consciously acknowledge. The part of them that's still the wounded child who needed reliable caregiving recognizes your steadiness and begins to trust it. Bonding happens not through dramatic declarations, but through accumulated evidence that you're safe. The lack of pressure is equally important because pressure activates all the avoidance defenses. If your consistency comes with expectation that they match it, if your reliability is presented as model they should follow, if your presence feels like obligation they have to reciprocate, the avoidant will resist and withdraw. But when your consistency is just how you operate, when it's not commentary on their inconsistency, when it doesn't create pressure on them to be different, they can receive it without defensiveness. They can appreciate your steadiness without feeling judged by it, and in appreciating it without defending against it, they begin bonding to you as a safe person. The consistency without pressure also bonds the avoidant because it demonstrates secure attachment. And secure attachment is what avoidants are unconsciously looking for even as they resist it. You're showing them what healthy looks like. You're modeling reliability without codependency, presence without neediness, care without pressure. The avoidant is watching you be the kind of person they wish they could be, but don't know how to be. And in watching you, in being around someone who operates from security, they're learning that intimacy doesn't have to look like what they've always experienced. They're bonding to you as a teacher as much as a partner, someone who's showing them through your actions that relationship can be different from their fearful expectations. They bond to your lack of reaction to their withdrawal. One of the most powerful bonding experiences for an avoidant is when they withdraw, expecting drama or pursuit or emotional intensity, and instead, you just let them go without making it a crisis. You don't chase them. You don't send desperate messages. You don't make their need for space into evidence of relationship failure. You just give them the space they've indicated they need, and you go about your life. This non-reaction is revolutionary to the avoidant because it defies everything they expect. They're used to their withdrawal creating panic in others. But your calm acceptance of their distance teaches them something crucial. They can be themselves with you, and it won't create catastrophe. The lack of reaction bonds them because it proves you're not trying to control them. The avoidant is hypervigilant about control. They're watching for any sign that you're trying to manage their behavior, manipulate their choices, pressure them into being different. When they withdraw and you react with pursuit or anger or hurt, they interpret your reaction as attempt to control them through emotion. But when they withdraw and you simply accept it, when you demonstrate that their choices about distance are theirs to make, they experience relief. You're not trying to control them. You're respecting their autonomy. And respect for autonomy is bonding for the avoidant in ways that pursuit or emotional reaction never could be. Your non-reaction also bonds them because it creates space for them to miss you. When you're pursuing them, when you're filling their space with your need and your presence and your messages, the avoidant can't feel your absence because you're not actually absent. But when you truly give them space, when you're genuinely gone, the avoidant has opportunity to feel what your absence is like. They notice the gap your presence usually fills. They miss you. They want to reconnect. And these feelings of missing and wanting are crucial for bonding because they represent the avoidant choosing you, reaching for you, rather than you always being the one reaching for them. The calm acceptance of their withdrawal is bonding because it teaches them their pattern doesn't destroy the relationship. The avoidant is used to their withdrawal being relationship ending or at minimum creating major conflict. But when you accept their withdrawal as normal, when you don't make it mean the relationship is over, when you're still there when they return, they learn something new. Their pattern is survivable. They can be avoidant and still maintain connection. This learning is foundational for bonding because it means the avoidant doesn't have to choose between being themselves and having relationship with you. They can have both, which makes them bond to you as the person who makes both possible. They bond to feeling admired and understood without being fixed. The avoidant bonds powerfully to people who can see them clearly, understand their patterns, appreciate their positive qualities, and simultaneously not try to fix or change them. This is perhaps the hardest balance to strike because seeing someone's limitations naturally creates desire to help them grow. But the avoidant experiences attempts to fix them as rejection of who they are, as confirmation that they're not acceptable as is, as pressure to be different that activates resistance. When you can understand them deeply without making that understanding into a project of changing them, when you can admire what's genuinely admirable about them without ignoring their limitations, when you can accept them as they are, while having boundaries about what you'll accept, you create conditions for profound bonding. The avoidant bonds to being understood because being understood without judgment is so rare in their experience. Most people who understand the avoidance patterns respond with frustration, with trying to push them toward change, with expressing hurt about their limitations. But when you understand their patterns and respond with compassion rather than pressure, with curiosity rather than judgment, with acceptance rather than agenda, the avoidant experiences something transformative. They're being seen and they're not being rejected for what you see. This experience is bonding because it challenges their core belief that being truly known leads to abandonment. The admiration is bonding because the avoidant's self-esteem is often more fragile than their defended exterior suggests. Underneath their independence and apparent confidence is frequently shame about their inability to connect, fear that they're fundamentally broken, belief that they're not enough. When you genuinely admire qualities in them, when you appreciate their intelligence or their creativity or their competence or their humor, when you see beyond their defenses to the person underneath, they bond to you as someone who sees good in them they struggle to see in themselves. Your admiration doesn't fix their shame, but it contradicts it, and that contradiction is powerful enough to create attachment. The lack of fixing attempts is crucial because attempts to change them make them feel not accepted. The avoidant has typically experienced conditional acceptance throughout their life. People accept them if they're more available, more emotional, more committed. But you're offering something different, acceptance of who they actually are right now. You're not waiting for them to change to find them acceptable. You're finding them acceptable while being clear about your boundaries regarding what treatment you'll accept. This unconditional acceptance of their being combined with conditional acceptance of their behavior creates safety. They can be themselves with you. They don't have to perform or pretend. And in that safety of being accepted as is, bonding becomes possible. They bond to shared values around autonomy and space. The avoidant bonds most deeply to people who genuinely share their values rather than pretending to share them. If you actually value autonomy, if you genuinely need space yourself, if you're truly comfortable with less connection than typical relationship models require, the avoidant will bond to you as someone who gets it. You're not sacrificing your needs to accommodate theirs. You're not pretending space doesn't bother you when it does. You genuinely operate from similar values around independence and personal space, and that shared framework creates bonding because the avoidant finally feels understood rather than tolerated or accommodated. The shared value of autonomy bonds the avoidant because it means you won't try to restrict their freedom. Many relationships become sites of negotiation about freedom versus togetherness. But when you value autonomy as highly as they do, when you're defending your own freedom as firmly as they defend theirs, there's no negotiation required. You both want similar amounts of space and independence. You both value having your own lives. You both prioritize personal freedom. This alignment means the relationship doesn't involve one person trying to pull toward more togetherness while the other pulls toward more space. You're pulling in the same direction, and that aligned pulling creates partnership. The shared value of space bonds them because it eliminates the guilt they usually carry. The avoidant typically feels guilty about needing so much space. They're aware it hurts partners. They know it's not what most people want. But when you need space too, when you have your own life and pursuits that require time away from them, their space needs stop being a problem that damages the relationship. Space becomes something you both need and provide for each other. The avoidant bonds to this mutual respect for autonomy because it's so different from the typical dynamic where they're the bad one needing too much distance. The shared values bond them because commonality is always bonding, but shared values around the exact things that usually create relationship conflict are especially bonding. You're not fighting about how much time to spend together because you both want similar amounts. You're not negotiating about space because you both need it. You're not arguing about independence because you both value it equally. The avoidant experiences you as partner, rather than as someone trying to change them into a different type of person. This experience of partnership, based on actual compatibility rather than accommodation, creates deep bonding because it feels sustainable in ways most of their relationships haven't. They bond to you through gradual vulnerability that they initiate. The avoidant bonds through vulnerability, but only when the vulnerability unfolds at their pace and comes from their initiative. When you push them to be vulnerable, when you demand emotional sharing, when you expect openness according to your timeline, the avoidant resists and withdraws. But when you create space where vulnerability could happen without requiring that it happen, when you demonstrate your own appropriate vulnerability without demanding reciprocation, when you're patient enough to wait for them to open up when they're ready, the avoidant eventually shares. And when they share at their own pace, when they initiate vulnerability because they want to not, because they're pressured to, bonding happens in ways that forced vulnerability never creates. The self-initiated vulnerability bonds the avoidant because it means they're choosing it. Choice is everything to the avoidant. When they're choosing to be vulnerable, they maintain control over the pace of intimacy, and that control makes the vulnerability feel safe enough to risk. They're not being pulled into deeper water than they can handle. They're wading in at their own speed. And the safety of self-determined pacing allows them to go deeper eventually than they could if they were being pushed. The bonding that occurs through vulnerability they've chosen is bonding to you as a safe person, someone they can trust with their real feelings because you've proven through patience that you won't force or rush them. The gradual unfolding of avoidant vulnerability is bonding, because each small sharing is a test. And when you receive it well, without making it into a big deal or demanding more, you pass the test. The avoidant shares something slightly vulnerable. You receive it with warmth but without overwhelming reaction. You don't make the sharing into evidence you can now demand more sharing. You just appreciate what they gave and continue being yourself. And because you passed that test, because you proved safe with small vulnerability, the avoidant eventually shares something more vulnerable. Each layer of sharing that you receive well creates bonding, because it's evidence you can be trusted with their real self. The avoidant also bonds through witnessing your vulnerability when you share appropriately without dumping or demanding. You demonstrate what healthy vulnerability looks like. You share things that are real but not overwhelming. You're honest about feelings without making the avoidant responsible for those feelings. You show emotion without drowning them in it. The avoidant is watching you be vulnerable in ways that don't feel threatening or burdensome, and they're learning from you. Your modeling of healthy vulnerability eventually makes them want to try it themselves. And when they do try it, when they risk sharing with you, and you receive it the way you've been modeling, bonding happens through the mutual experience of being seen and accepted. What bonding with an avoidant actually means and doesn't mean. Understanding what creates bonding with avoidance is important, but it's equally important to understand what bonding does and doesn't mean when it happens. Bonding means the avoidant has formed attachment to you. They care about you. You matter to them. They feel connected in ways they don't feel connected to most people. But bonding doesn't mean they're suddenly capable of healthy relationship. Bonding doesn't cure their avoidance. Bonding doesn't make them able to provide consistency, vulnerability, and commitment that partnership requires. An avoidant can be deeply bonded to you and still be largely unavailable emotionally. They can care intensely while still being unable to show up reliably. Bonding is necessary foundation, but it's not sufficient structure. You also need to understand that creating the conditions for avoidant bonding often requires you to suppress your needs and accept less intimacy than you might want. The emotional independence that bonds them means you can't rely on them for emotional support the way you might in a typical relationship. The mysterious unavailability means you're not fully sharing your life with them. The lack of reaction to their withdrawal means you're tolerating distance that might actually hurt you while pretending you're fine with it. Creating avoidant bonding by becoming what they need can mean betraying what you need. Many people successfully bond avoidance to them and then discover the relationship that bonded person is capable of still isn't enough. The bonding also doesn't prevent the avoidant from eventually deactivating. Avoidance can be bonded to you, can care deeply, can be attached, and still reach a point where their fear overrides their attachment and they completely shut down. Bonding delays deactivation and makes the relationship last longer, but it doesn't prevent the avoidant from hitting their intimacy ceiling and withdrawing when the relationship demands more than they can handle. You can do everything right, can create all the conditions for avoidant bonding, can be the person they're most attached to, and they can still eventually leave because bonding doesn't heal attachment wounds. Only therapeutic work heals attachment wounds, and most avoidants don't do that work even when bonded to someone they love. Understanding avoidant bonding should inform your decisions about whether to pursue relationship with an avoidant in the first place. If you're someone who needs typical relationship intimacy, who wants partnership with consistent emotional availability, who can't be emotionally independent because you value interdependence, then creating the conditions for avoidant bonding requires you to be someone you're not. And being someone you're not, to bond someone who's emotionally limited, isn't a recipe for your happiness. But if you genuinely share the avoidance values, if you're actually comfortable with the kind of relationship that allows avoidant bonding, if independence and space are genuinely what you want too, then understanding what bonds them helps you create relationship that works for both of you. The question isn't just whether you can bond the avoidant, it's whether the bonded relationship they're capable of is one you actually want to be in.